Friends, welcome to this program on open educational resources and open education practices. This is, of course, part of the course in the master's program, course 518 on communication technology, but this could also be used as a MOOC elsewhere. This could also become an open source for anybody to learn from, because this is about open education resources. So in this program, briefly, I will outline what is an open education resource, what is the status today, and how to design and develop briefly, and leading to use of OER, leading to more of open education practices, which will be much more inclusive, much more flexible, and more of access and equity could also be provided through that. So friends, in a recent 2015 publication by Commonwealth of Learning and UNESCO, our three colleagues, Professor Neil Butcher, Professor Asa Kanwar, the President and CEO of the Commonwealth of Learning, and Stamenka Trumbik from the UNESCO, they brought out a publication and finally settled defining an open education resources, because a whole lot of definitions are available today, when in 2002 the UNESCO declared open education resources. Starting with that, many universities also started throwing their courses open to the public free of cost, and therefore from there a lot of online courses, free online courses called MOOCs, massive open online courses, also got developed and offered free of cost internationally. Open education resources, the resources that are available, they're authentic. They could be print, audio, video, graphics, animation data, anything that is available, but they could be called open because the concept describes any educational resources, including curriculum maps, course materials, textbooks, streaming videos, multimedia applications, podcasts, or any other materials that have been designed for use in teaching and learning that are openly available for use by educators and students. The idea is openly available to everybody without an accompanying need to pay royalties or license fees, meaning thereby, in a copyright material, the creator retains the moral right, but the creator also is paid royalty on the sale of those materials. In this case, all those materials, when they are declared as open through a legal provision of Creative Commons, for instance, if they are declared as legal, open, then certainly anybody can use that, and there is no question of any royalty. So therefore, one can invest money to develop those resources, but when these resources are available free of cost, there is no question of royalty. So money is spent to develop those resources, but money is not gained out of the circulation of these resources. So the open education resource pedagogy would simply mean there are 5 ways to define an open education resource. These are called 5 R's. The 5 R's apply to teacher activities and learner, A is missing there, friends, but learner activities of teaching and learning. The first is retain. That who retains the ownership and the control of that. That would also be a pedagogic factor. Reuse, the appropriate use and reuse. So one can retain it, one can also reuse those resources. One can also revise as per needs and requirements of the students or the clients or the learner groups. One can also remix with other resources. A print can be mixed with an audio, audio can be mixed with a video, video can be mixed with animation, and all kinds of possibilities are there, combining existing with contemporary developments. One can take an old OER or a MOOC and can mix with some latest developments based on research and development R&D, and can also use that. So retain, reuse, revise, and remix, and can also redistribute free sharing of revised or remixed approaches. This is called sharing. So open sharing, that open sharing is also possible. Internationally, there is the copyright is called C, and the copyright free or legally protected copyright made available free of cost to anybody, everybody in this world is called Creative Commons CC. CC would mean that these are open education resources protected by, legally protected by copyright principles, and they are copyright free, but there are different ways to do that. 4 are listed here. One is about attribution, that the credit has to be given to the author, and this is called indicated by a symbol called BY. The second attribution is non-commercial, that don't make money out of that, and therefore it is called NC. If any such material is branded as NC, you cannot commercially use it. If it is listed BY, because the credit has to be given by the author. In any case, every material is created by an author, and BY is common, by the way. No derivative, that no changes. You can only use that. You cannot make any changes, and therefore it will be written ND. When on those resources it is written ND, you cannot make changes. Legally, you cannot make changes, for sure. And share alike, SA, that same licensing for changes. If you are making some changes, and if the previous material is listed as SA, share alike, the changes that you have made to those materials you have also to share alike to everybody. You have also to make that an SA. You cannot say that I have used that and I will retain the copyright, I will not share with others. No, you have to share with this. So friends, 3, 4, 5, 6 kinds of attributions are listed here. One is about CC BY. In this case, the license lets others distribute, remix, tweak, and build upon work of others, even commercially, as long as they credit the original author for the original creation. So the original author is acknowledged, that credited for, and one can also use this commercially wherever it is written CC BY. The second kind of attribution given to those copyright-free materials is share alike. That means CC BY-SA, share alike. That would simply mean this license lets others remix, tweak, and build upon the work of the original author, even for commercial purposes, as long as they credit the author and license their new creations under the identical terms called SA, share alike. This license is often compared to copyleft, free and open source software licenses. Some people call it copyleft, for instance. Copyright and copyleft. 3, attribution non-derivatives. That would be indicated by the symbol CC-BY-ND. ND would be non-derivative. That would simply mean that this license allows for redistribution, commercial and non-commercial, as long as it is passed along unchanged and in whole with credit to the original author. And the red portions you would mark it because that indicates what precisely it is. The fourth one, attribution non-commercial, this will be indicated by NC. Non-commercial means you cannot buy and sell these, and therefore this license lets others remix, tweak, and build upon the work of original author non-commercially. So the emphasis here is non-commercially. And although their new works must also acknowledge the author and be non-commercial, of course, they don't have to license their derivative works on the similar terms like SA, share alike, for instance. Attribution non-commercial, share alike, CC BY-NC SA. This license lets others remix, tweak, and build upon the work of original author non-commercially. There is a non-commerciality, you cannot commercially use this, as long as they credit the author and license their new creations under the identical terms. And finally, attribution non-commercial, non-derivatives, NC-ND. So there is a commercial aspect, there is a derivation aspect in this case. So the final one, this license is the most restrictive one. So starting from the most open for the first one, the last one becomes more restrictive, less open. Of the 6 main licenses, only allowing others to download the works of original author and share them with others as long as they credit the author, but they can't change the term in any way or use them commercially. That would simply mean that here you can only download and read, and you cannot change anything in that, but you have to credit the author, as we do in citations in copyrighted materials also. The Creative Commons licenses, you will have a close look a little later. So all the 6 that I described, whether the copy and publish, the attribution, the commercial use, whether modification is possible, all these, the tick mark and indicates that these are possible, and wherever there is no tick mark, these are not possible. Meaning thereby that when these open education resources declared under Creative Commons CC, they are available on the website. They are all available on the website because the internet provides for this internationally. People throw to the internet, and you can download and even use an existing material online within the internet, on the web itself. When these are available, you have to very carefully study whether these are available for all kinds of possibilities, or 6 kinds of attribution, that legal attribution that we have discussed so far. And accordingly, you have to use that. So one has to be very careful. In copyright, intellectual property right, one is legally very careful. We cannot violate the copyright. Anything, everything that is available on the internet, almost everything is copyrighted. We cannot pick it up, even a sentence, other than what is allowed otherwise in the copyright law. We cannot pick up anything from the internet. We have to attribute for that. Everything is copyrighted, except those who are declared under CC or Creative Commons. Based on these aspects, whether you can use, reuse, commercially use, do a non-derivative of that, and so on and so forth. One has to be very careful in both copyrighted materials as well as open education resources. So this kind of licensing is available, as I said earlier, but this is just a graphic representation of that. An acknowledgement is given there that the attribution CC BY is the most free material or most open to all of us. And the last attribution, non-commercial and non-derivative, is almost restricted or the least free. So starting in the pyramid, the green one is the most free materials that you can, so those which are CC BY, they are largely used by everybody because they are most free. And those which are CC BY, NC, ND, they are very restricted, and therefore one has to be very careful while using those materials, except that you can also download free of cost. You can download and read and use for your students in a very limited way. These are some of the finer open education resources repositories that are available today internationally. If you click here, almost the websites are given here. Global Learning Objects Brokered Exchange, Foxomatic, DiscoverEd, Creative Commons Share, for instance, Open Courseware Consortium, OCW, MIT OCW, Medical Aid Portal, the Open Learn of the British Open University, the China Open Education Resources for Education, CURE, the TESA materials which were developed for teacher education all over the world, especially in Africa, India, and many other countries. OER Africa is a very powerful repository. Whole lot of authentic resources are available. CreativeCommons.org, Commonwealth of Learning, and UNESCO. And I will also recommend Merlot because not that I was sitting on the editorial advisory board of Merlot, which is an internationally very reputed and authentic database free of cost, or OER database for varieties of resources at www.merlot.org. Multimedia educational resource for learning and online teaching, largely used by professors all over the world as well as by students. So friends, we are getting into what is called from open education resources to open education practices. Generally, it is believed that when we use in a large scale, or almost every teaching learning is based on open educational resources, we have already entered into what is called open educational practices. But by simply using open education resources doesn't necessarily mean that we are fully into open education practices. We have also to bring in what is called open pedagogy and flexibility and open learning and open education. So open education, open learning, and open pedagogy, if they would be brought in, largely facilitated by the social technologies and networks, the latest technologies and networks that are available today, we would be getting into what is called an open education practices. That would simply mean it is not only resources, but also the organization management, the technology use, the learner support services. So the entire campus, within the campus, or if it is a distance learning, the entire network or online learning, or blended learning, the entire network operation needs to be geared towards openness, and therefore we would call it open education practices. I hope I'm communicating that open education resources is a larger possibility, larger contributor to open education practices. What gradually is happening is that we are aiming at is that we must get into what is called open educational practices, to providing more flexibility to the learners, to bring in multi-perspectives, to engage students in multiple pathways and multiple activities as per their own choice, engaging students in the co-creation of content and tasks and assignments and activities and so on and so forth, including portfolios, as also gearing the entire educational institution or the training organization towards supporting an openness and flexibility and bringing in open learning and open pedagogy, and therefore use of open education resources and getting into what is called OEP, or the open education practices. And therefore this diagram, which left-hand side talks about open, about learning and teaching practices, and the right-hand side talks about the quality of the open content. So therefore, content and practices put together towards openness and flexibility would lead to what is called open educational practices. Therefore, friends, the open educational practices, some of the fewer definitions that we have today available to us, I've just jotted down. Professor Wolf Daniel Halles in 2011 talks about practices which support the reuse and production of open education resources through institutional policies. Now the question of policy is coming in. Whether the institution has a policy of use of open education resources. Also, I will go a step ahead, submitting that whether the institution has a policy for open educational practices, that would mean the finance, management, the construction, the support, teaching, learning, the media, learner support, and so on and so forth, all are geared towards openness and flexibility. That would simply mean meeting the individual needs of individualized students or individual students. Students as individuals and students as groups. So both inclusivity and access and equity are also addressed within that framework. And there should be more innovative pedagogic models based on starting from the behavioristic to more constructivist and more technology-enabled, individualized, as well as group learning activities which are more reflective, more engaging, and so on and so forth, more task-based, more activity-based, and more collaborative, more engaging, and more reflective and innovative. These pedagogic models, if you would like to bring in, including, of course, classroom lecturing, but lecturing would have much less role insofar as transmission of information is concerned. And respect and empower learners as co-producers of their lifelong learning path. That the learners not only would determine the way they would like to proceed, but also learners will be co-creators of the content. Content doesn't mean only a textbook or a written material. It could be audio, it could be video, it could be a task, it could be a portfolio, it could be a case study, it could be an assignment, it could be a practice, hands-on practice output. So all are geared towards, of course, the learning outcomes which would determine these. So these would determine whether we are into open educational practices. Catherine Cronin in 2017 says that open education practices is a broad descriptor of practices that include the creation, use, and reuse of open education resources that we have seen already, as well as open pedagogies, and open sharing of teaching practices. What's not happening today, the teaching practices are not openly shared. What is important today to keep evidence of our teaching practices of curriculum, teaching learning, media and technology, interaction, learner support, assignments and activities that we do, and so on and so forth. We need to keep evidence of that, and that evidence should be shared across the board between disciplines and between professors of a discipline. Collaborative practices that include the creation, use and reuse of OER. That simply means that the students would also, as co-travelers in the path of teaching and learning, could also create resources called open education resources, which could be also equally high quality and authentic, as well as pedagogic practices employing participatory technologies and social networks for interaction. This is very important because when Professor George Seaman talked about connectivism, we were talking about CMOOCs, for instance, and these days edX and SOAM and all these are XMOOCs, for instance. But in the connectivity-based MOOC, that the networks that are available, the nodes and networks that are available, which could be authenticated by the teacher. Of course, the teacher would have a role to play, but those networks would be chipped in to contribute towards teaching and learning, including social technology and social networks. It could be Facebook, it could be anything, it could be YouTube, and any kind of platform. And professional networks are plenty. We are just talking about very common platforms, social platforms, but professional platforms relating to one's discipline or profession are plenty. Those could be brought in to engage students and teachers in that. Participatory technologies and social networks for interaction, peer learning, knowledge creation, and empowerment. These are innovative pedagogies that would do. If we go a little further, for instance, in 2008, the Cape Town Declaration talked about that open education is not limited to just open educational resources, as I was talking about, for instance. It also draws upon open technologies, that open source technologies could also come in, that facilitate collaborative learning, flexible learning, and open sharing of teaching practices that empower educators to benefit from the best ideas of their colleagues all over the world. It may also grow to include new approaches to assessment. So the assessment strategies, assessment rubric would also undergo significant changes when these open educational practices are brought in and open pedagogies are brought in. And assessment could be more individualized. Of course, there could be collaborative or group assessment, but assessment could also be geared towards individual needs, abilities, and interests. And accreditation and collaborative learning. In Britain, the JIC 2012 talked about 6 considerations that would contribute to examine whether a practice, educational practice, teaching, learning, or training practice is an open education or training practice. Production, management, use, and reuse of open educational resources. This is, of course, number one, very common to everybody. Developing and applying open and public pedagogies in teaching practice. There is an open pedagogy, there is also public pedagogy. Public pedagogy, for instance, your blogging, your wiki, which is a collaborative learning, which is available to everybody and to anybody. So therefore, this is available in the public domain. So our teaching learning is more restricted, password protected to our website or learning management system or classroom. But here, if it is available in the public could also contribute towards that. So that will be height of practice of open education practices actually. There is an open learning and gaining access to open learning opportunities. Of course, individualized pathways could be possible depending on multiple entry and exit and depending on credit accumulation, depending on one's own ability as well as interest, called the aptitude. There's an open sharing of teaching ideas and know-how. And finally, the using open technologies like web-based platforms, applications, and services in an educational context. So friends, to conclude, what I would simply submit is that we have briefly touched upon the nature of open educational resources available today, the copyright issues and the copyleft issues and the open educational resources, the Creative Commons CC issues, where you can download and use as much as you like, where you can also remix, redistribute, reuse, and where you cannot or can commercially use that. And there is always a non-derivative that you cannot do anything with that, starting with the least free open educational resource to most free open educational resources. And the use of OER, besides open pedagogies, open learning, open educational practices, and the entire management, institutional management and organization and delivery all put together, leading towards what is called open education practices. So friends, this is a submission only for your consideration, that we could use more of open education resources if they are not cost intensive, if they could save our cost. There are open textbooks available today, and if OERs could be more culturally and academically more appropriate to your context and which will be free of cost, you could also consider using that. And while using that, we should aim at bringing in open education, open learning, and open pedagogies and open sharing to lead towards what is called open educational practices today and in future. And technology would also facilitate that. Thank you very much indeed.